Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're taking a deep dive into something that's like the hidden framework behind so many things we take for granted, decision sequences,
Yeah.
and how they determine ranges.
You know what's fascinating is that we're talking about a concept that's fundamental to programming logic, but something we use intuitively in everyday life without even realizing it.
Totally. Like figuring out which youth soccer league a child belongs to based on their age. Our sources use that as an example, and it got me thinking, why is the under-8 team only for 7-year-olds? What about the kids who are 5 or 6?
Right, that's where these decision sequences come into play. Think of it as a set of very specific if this, then that instructions that determine exactly where something falls within a range.
Okay, I love a good analogy.
Yeah.
So in the soccer case, it's like saying, if the player is 6 or younger, then no team for you yet, kiddo.
Precisely. And this is where that if-then-ELSC structure becomes super important. Because the next step would be ELSC if the player is 7, then they're on the under-8 team. That ELSC ensures we're only looking at ages that haven't already been assigned a spot.
So it's like a sorting hat for soccer players. But instead of magic, it's pure logic ensuring no one ends up on 2 teams at once.
Exactly. Each age gets slotted into its designated range. This kind of logical flow is what brings order to complexity, whether it's on a soccer field or in, say, programming a complex system.
See, that's what blows my mind here. This seemingly simple concept is actually a powerful tool for creating order and predictability in countless systems.
It absolutely is. And it's not limited to just age ranges. Think about this example from the source material. X is less than 10, then X is less than 20, then X is less than 30, and finally, else.
Okay, let's unpack that one. That feels a lot more abstract.
Right. We're moving away from soccer and into the realm of pure numbers and ranges. Imagine a number line. If X is less than 10, we're talking about everything from 0 to 9.
Got it. Because the source material specified that we're working with non-negative numbers in this case. So what happens when we hit X is less than 20?
Now we're defining the next range. It can't include anything less than 10 because we've already accounted for those numbers. So this range would cover 10 through 19.
And then X less than 30 would be 20 through 29. It's like each condition builds upon the previous one, right?
You got it. And as you notice with the soccer example, that else at the end is crucial. In this case, else represents anything that didn't fit the previous conditions. So any number 30 or greater.
It's like the catch-all, making sure nothing falls through the cracks. I'm starting to see how this if-then-else logic is the engine driving these ranges. But how does this actually play out in real-world scenarios beyond abstract numbers?
Well, remember that example about how insurance companies determine prices?
Oh, right.
Right.
They use those age brackets, 15 and under, 16 to 24, and so on. It suddenly seems so obvious now.
It's a classic example of decision sequences in action. If you're 15 or under, which the source cleverly pointed out is a way of saying too young to drive, then you fall into this pricing category.
And just like that, we've gone from kids on a soccer field to insurance premiums, all thanks to the power of decision sequences. It's like this hidden code suddenly making sense.
Yeah, it is quite elegant when you think about it, this simple structure underpinning so many systems we interact with every day.
Speaking of those systems, I have to ask, are there any gotchas with these decision sequences? Because if we mess up that if-then-else logic, it feels like things could go haywire pretty quickly.
That's a really important point, and it highlights why understanding not just the how, but the why of these sequences is so crucial. Because you're absolutely right. A poorly constructed decision sequence can lead to unintended consequences.
Oh, I love a good cautionary tale. Do you have an example?
Remember that example from the source material asking if this sequence was reasonable. X is less than 100. Do A, X is less than 200. Do B, X is less than 150. Do C, else do D. What do you notice about the order of those conditions?
Okay, let me see. 100, 200, then back down to 150. That feels out of order, like those Russian nesting dolls where you put a smaller one inside a bigger one.
That's a fantastic analogy. And you've hit on the core issue, because if X happens to be 160, it would never even reach that X is less than 150 condition. It gets stuck at X is less than 200.
So even though 160 technically fits that less than 150 rule, the sequence, as it's currently designed, prevents it from ever being evaluated against that criteria.
Exactly. The order matters. If x is less than 150 came before x is less than 200, it would work as intended. It's like putting those nesting dolls in the right order, from smallest to largest, so you can access them all.
So it's not enough to just know the if-then-else structure. You have to think carefully about the sequence of those conditions, especially when you're dealing with more complex scenarios.
Yeah.
But how do you guard against these sorts of oversights? Is it just a matter of being extra careful?
Being mindful is certainly key. But there are also strategic approaches you can take to make your decision sequences more robust. One common technique is to arrange conditions from most restrictive to least restrictive.
So in that earlier example, you'd start with x is less than 150 because that's the narrowest condition, then move on to x is less than 200, and so forth. You're essentially funneling down the possibilities with each step.
You got it. This funnel approach ensures that each condition gets a fair shot at being evaluated. It minimizes the risk of a value getting stuck prematurely because it met a broader condition earlier in the sequence.
It's like that saying, measure twice, cut once, but for logic.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe, as we're diving into the world of decision sequences, it's more like think twice, code once.
Laughs.
I love that. We should coin that phrase. But in all seriousness, thinking about these sequences as a tool for managing complexity, for making decisions more efficient and accurate, it really can be a game changer.
Absolutely. And what's fascinating to me is that this isn't just about becoming a whiz at programming or logic puzzles. It's a fundamental skill that has applications in countless areas of life.
Couldn't agree more. Whether it's something as complex as automating a task, as structured as creating a decision tree for a project, or even as simple as becoming more aware of how choices are presented to us in everyday life, understanding decision sequences is incredibly valuable.
It's like we've unlocked a secret level of awareness about how the world works. But before we get too carried away with our newfound logic superpowers, I think it's time for our final thought. And today, instead of me offering up a final nugget of wisdom, I'm curious what resonated most with you today. What's one thing about decision sequences that you could see yourself applying in your own life or work?
Woo. I like that. It's like you're challenging our listeners to take this knowledge out for a spin, which is what the deep dive is all about.
Exactly. Because it's one thing to understand a concept, but the real magic happens when we start seeing those aha moments play out in our own experiences.
For me, that aha moment was realizing how important it is to arrange those conditions in a decision sequence, from most restrictive to least restrictive. It's such a subtle thing, but when you frame it as putting those logical nesting dolls in the right order, it just clicks.
I love that analogy. It perfectly illustrates how even a small tweak can make all the difference in ensuring a system functions effectively. And that principle, that attention to detail in structuring decisions, applies whether you're writing code, creating a business process, or even just making a plan for your day.
It's like having a new mental framework to approach problem solving, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. And who knows what other insights might emerge as you continue to explore this concept. You might be surprised at how many systems, both big and small, rely on this elegant logic of decision sequences.
It's a bit like that feeling when you learn a new word and suddenly you hear it everywhere you go.
Yeah.
Except in this case, it's a new way of thinking about how decisions are made, how systems are structured.
Precisely. So keep an eye out for those decision sequences in the wild. And most importantly, don't be afraid to experiment with applying this knowledge in your own life.
And on that note of exploration and experimentation, we'll wrap up this deep dive. It's been an absolute pleasure unraveling the logic of decision sequences with you.
The pleasure was all mine. Until next time, keep those brains engaged and those if-then-else statements flowing.
And remember, sometimes the most powerful tools are the ones we use without even realizing it. See you next time on The Deep Dive.